was a hard season because I was floundering for sure. Well, my name is Libby, and I grew up in a small town in southeastern Virginia. Grew up in a Christian home. My dad was a pastor of just a small country church. I'm one of 6 kids. I was the oldest girl, so we had a fun Brady Bunch, boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl. Was homeschooled. And I feel like that is a significant part of my upbringing. The foundation for who I am today started at such a young age. I was privileged to grow up in one church. So I don't know if you know anything about pastors or pastors' families. They often change churches. It's kind of, change jobs, that sort of thing. So to have a pastor's family that spends 38 years in one church is unique. And I think it's something I'm really thankful for. I can look back on the people that have poured into me and have mentored me and discipled me, and I still have relationships with them today. So I feel like that's a really big part of who I am now, came from how I was raised. I also feel really thankful that I've had a relatively steady Christian relationship. I grew up in a Christian home. I got saved at a young age. I was probably 6 years old, roughly. I was baptized in the James River by my best friend's dad. So that's ultimately my first kind of this Jesus shift. My testimony is how I got saved. And I've been privileged. I feel like the Lord has just been faithful that I'm 37 years old today. And I've walked with Jesus most of my life. I have not had a season where I strayed away. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't like I'm a solid Christian for the last 31 years, but I have the type of story where I got saved, I've stayed in church, I've followed Jesus, and here I am today. But one thing I've realized about that journey and that story is God has still done some really significant things in my life to shape me, to mold me, to change me. I'm just truly blessed, and I can look back on really hard seasons where it did not make sense why I was walking through what I was walking through, but like it is now on the other side of that and just being really happy in my life. It's just been really good to look back on and see what God has done. So after kind of growing up in my small town, I was blessed to go to a Christian university. So I just kind of moved from one Christian environment to another. I went with my best friend. We lived across the hall from each other. And looking back on that season, I feel so thankful because I'm an introvert. I kind of went into college having really never branched outside of my bubble of my small town and my church. I'd worked through high school. So it wasn't like I was completely sheltered, but I definitely had a pretty unique life. And so I was thankful for a best friend that she was ready to meet friends and to kind of live that college life. And I've joked with her over the years that she made friends and sort of brought me along with her. And I'm thankful for the friends that she made. So I look back on my college years, and there ended up being, it kind of ebbs and flows. The first year you make friends, you kind of get to know people. But after that kind of freshman year, there was a group of 5 of us that just really clicked well together. We became absolutely inseparable best friends. And I really attribute so much of kind of what happened after college to the foundation that they continued to help lay in my Christian life. So college can be an formative time in someone's life, especially someone like me who never really lived outside of, a small town and again, just kind of lived a little bit of a sheltered life. But these girls, these women that I became friends with were godly, solid, encouraging, like just faith-centered women that pointed me to Jesus. And so because they became my friends, it was like that just continued my natural ebb and flow of my Christian life. We did vacations together. We did spring break. We knew each other's families. We all graduated. Like we had one big graduation party. It really just shaped so much of those 4 years at school by having, I think, that continued foundation to kind of get through college. They would all probably joke that if any of us would have gone a little bit wild in college, it probably would have been me. And so I feel God's faithfulness. So I started in a Christian home, Christian family, Christian church. I was loved, poured into, and then that followed me into college, which I feel like was just God's faithfulness to kind of get me through my 20s. So my 20s was where I feel like I was lost a little bit. So when I went into college, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. What did my career look like? Because if you had asked me from probably 4 years old, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would tell you, I wanted to be a wife and a mom, and I wanted to have a family. And I was raised with a stay-at-home mom. And so that was always my dream. And so when I got into college, it was like, wait, I have to pick a career. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to be a mom. I'm not going to have a job. And so I had a really hard time kind of figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. And so I got a degree. I did all the things. But then when I graduated college, I was like, okay, now what? Because I graduated college without a boyfriend and without a husband. So I was forced at that point to figure out like what I was going to do next. And I was only 21. So it wasn't like I, lived a whole lifetime after that. But my uncle owned a company in Pennsylvania and had a job for me if I wanted it. So, I spent a year there and it was a good season. Again, I was on my own and kind of began to really find my own footing. No negatives to that, but I was ready to come home. I was ready to be with family again. It was a little bit lonely. So I moved back to Virginia without a job. My parents were like, yeah, come back home. I had some savings and I know it's easier to find a job in the area that you live. And so I came home without a job and was staying with my parents and ended up working at Chick-fil-A because I did not have any sort of passion or desire or career goals at that point because I'm 22 years old thinking any day now I'm going to get married and have a family. So the job is temporary. And so I just started at Chick-fil-A, which was such a blessing. I feel like looking back on that, that's obviously not with the college degree, all these things I would have thought I'd ended up. But I spent years there. I spent about 6 or 7 years at different Chick-fil-A's, had a really good opportunity, worked for a really great operator that poured into me, met some best friends. Like it really was, I feel like a good season of my life. Still single. And through most of my 20s, I did have a guy that I felt like I latched onto and I wanted him to be the one and he wasn't. And we ended up in a situationship that I felt like really damaged my 20s and hindered my heart from being open to new interest or anything like that. So I'm working at Chick-fil-A, kind of held up on this guy. And I realized I was tired of working for Chick-fil-A. I was a general manager of a location. I was just doing really well. It was a great career, but it just wasn't, again, fulfilling me because I wanted to be a wife and a mom. I didn't want to have a job. And not to say I didn't want to work, but I had such a calling in my life for that. And it was a struggle. So I left that job thinking, oh, maybe I'll go back to Pennsylvania. My uncle's cousin has his job had changed. His company has changed. My cousin worked there. And so I was like, this will be different this time. And so I told my operator at Chick-fil-A that I was going to leave. And he was all supportive. He was a great friend. And I gave up the lease on my apartment. And then that job in Pennsylvania just sort of fell through. I could tell it was obvious that it was not God's plan for me. And so I'm roughly, 27, something like that, unemployed, without an apartment, no idea what I wanted to do. So I ended up back at my parents' house. I'm really thankful that they've just been supportive and willing. So I stayed there for a while. My boss at Chick-fil-A at the time kind of had some side work for me. He made sure I was not officially unemployed. So I kind of continued to do that. And that was a hard season because I was floundering for sure. And I think I went from being a general manager and independent and on my own to living above my parents' garage, really without a job. So I was thankful. Again, I was making money. And through all of that, I was still involved in church. I would say I had a relationship with the Lord. It wasn't like I had walked away from him. It wasn't a deep or joyful season per se. And then in 2017, the summer of 2017, I had a mutual friend who was leaving a job at a local museum here in the area and said, hey, I can get you an interview. And I was like, that'd be great. Like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. It was a job in human resources and I'd never done that before. So I interviewed, I made it to the final 2. And then I was thinking, this is it. This is my new start. And I didn't get the job. So it was like another kind of whammy. And so I stayed at my parents through the next 6-7 months. And then in February of 2018, the VP of HR, who had told me no the first time, called me back and said, hey, that job is open again. Are you still looking? Like, what does that mean for you? And so I was like, not too eager, but I was like, yeah, I'm still interested. That would be great. And so we had lunch and he brought me on board and I started April 1st of 2018. And I think the significance to that story and just the timing of all that was when I got there to this job, I realized quickly that there had been a new president and CEO within the last year who did not have a great relationship with my VP of HR, my boss. And they were butting heads. A lot of times that happens with upper level management like that when there's a lot of changes. And my boss was not happy. He was a disgruntled employee and didn't really do a lot. It was just really a lot of negativity. And I was just so excited to be there that I was able to sort of put all that behind me and thrive. And I was so excited and I was doing all these things and I was building relationships and making connection and sort of just ignoring his Debbie Downerness. And a couple months after I started, I want to say it was June, the president CEO announced that the VP of HR's position was being eliminated and he was, mutually moving on and all those things. And I had this immediate panic because I was like, wait a minute, I'm smart enough to know that you don't really need me and a director level or a manager level HR. And so I started thinking, oh no, like I'm about to lose my job. I just started. And I approached the president and CEO and long story short, I said, pick me. And anyway, so I got the promotion to the position to lead the human resources department. And looking back on that was such a significant moment that I can very clearly say that was 100% the Lord's timing. I was so disappointed when I didn't get the job the first time. But I know now that if I'd gotten that job of the summer of 2017, I don't believe the president and CEO was ready to make changes to the department. And if I had been sort of in that toxic, negative environment for longer than I was, who knows what that would have done to my career? Who knows if I had been able, would I have been negatively impacted? Would all of these things happen? So I feel like the Lord said, not yet, Libby, just give me a minute. Let's just take a break. And so when I started in April, it was just the perfect timing. The president and CEO was ready and I was ready. I was able to grow into that position. I spent 6 years. That's a big part of my story that I'll come back to. But I spent 6 years there and have never been more fulfilled or happy in a career. So that is a time where I say God was really faithful to bring me out of that. I was able to get an apartment again and kind of reestablish myself. I was 29 years old and felt like for the first time in my life, I had like a really good career. And so that was all kind of happening in the summer of 2018. And then September 6th of 2018, we got a notification or a call that my youngest brother, he was 24 at the time, was killed in a motorcycle accident in Sacramento, California, where he was living at the time. So, I didn't, in the beginning of my story, I didn't go a ton into like my family dynamic, but again, 6 kids, homeschooled, we, best friends, a really, really close family. So as you can imagine, that just completely shattered my family and just really rocked our world. And I actually found out like the day before I was supposed to start my promotion, and it was just a lot happening at one time. And the Lord was really faithful through that season. I could probably spend multiple podcast episodes somewhere talking about that, and I won't go too long into it. But one of the things that, came out of that was just to be able to see, again, the Lord's faithfulness. I should have looked it up, but I created a Facebook post a couple months after all of this happened and shared something that had happened to me that summer because I knew it was only within a few months before Shep passed away, where I was driving to work one day and I I've always been a little bit of an anxious person, and I just had this heaviness. I'm driving in the car and I felt this weight. I was afraid and I was anxious of like, what if something happens to someone I love? What if I lose my parents? What if I lose a sibling? And those are legitimate thoughts going through my mind as I'm driving down the road. What if I'm in a car accident? And just had this like heavy weight of fear. And even as I was driving, I felt the Lord not take that or lift that, but just say, you'll be okay. And not that like, if those things happen, you'll be fine and you'll live your best life. But it was just this peace that like washed over me, that if I experienced something hard, or at that point I'd lost no one, I was living like a really happy life. I hadn't experienced any sort of loss or trauma and so I think as I was driving down the road, I just felt this wave of peace that said, not really if that happens, but it felt like when that happens, I will be there. And I felt that in the night that I was notified about Shep. I was with my mom and my brother and my sister-in-law, and it was obviously shocking, and you just don't even imagine what hearing those words kind of does to your body. But it did feel like a wave of peace for me personally in those moments. And then obviously in the weeks to come, just feeling his presence, feeling faithful, or his faithfulness. I think a lot of times when people go through something like that, it can kind of draw you closer to the Lord or away from the Lord. And I feel very thankful that in that season, I had a lot of good things happening than to be crushed by something harder than I've ever gone through before. But he was really, really faithful. And from that, I feel like my spiritual life really did change. I was involved in church all through my 20s. That is something like I believe in being with the body of believers, but I wasn't in a church where I was connected or really felt community or anything like that. I mean, I had friends, but at this point I'm 30 years old. Most everyone I know is married and having kids, and then there's just me. And so church single is hard. And I say that for those out there that are single and having a hard time finding church. Going alone and going without friends is just, it was hard for me. And I remember wanting to change and find a new church and kind of praying over that. And I'm an introvert. I'm quiet. I just feel really little social anxiety and things like that. And so that's, I think, why going to church alone is hard. And there was a certain church in the community that was tied to a Christian school where my brothers had played sports. So my youngest brother, Shep, was kind of connected to this church. And I knew people that went there. I had tried it before, and it's a big enough church that if you don't make effort, you can walk in and walk out and no one will really know you're there. And so I had done that before. I kind of snuck in, made no effort, and then left, but then felt disappointed, that no one had talked to me, even though I made no effort to talk to anyone. But so I prayed before I went. I said, Lord, I'm in a season where I need friends. I need community. I need people pouring into me. Like, I am in a season of grief. I need you when I walk into this church. I need you to make it easy. That's what I said to the Lord. I need you to make it easy for me to talk to someone or meet someone, because this is it. I'm going into this church and I need that from you. And so I walked in and I sat and I kind of got there a few minutes early, and, people waved at me or whatever. And I'm kind of looking around, trying to make eye contact, and made it through the service, made it to after the service. And I'm almost feeling like, Lord, I asked for this. Like, why am I about to walk out of the church? Why am I afraid? Why am I scared? And I start walking out the door, and I made eye contact with the lead pastor. I knew who he was. I think he'd preached. I don't really remember, but I made eye contact with him, and he made a beeline right for me. And he said, hi, and he introduced himself, and he started talking to me. And I don't know, I can't remember my side of the conversation or how it kind of came about, who I was or what I needed, but he pulled over a guy about my age, I don't remember if his wife was there too, and I actually think I had told him about Shep. I think I had mentioned that, my brother had passed away and I needed some connection and some community. So he pulled over a guy who leads a small group, and he was like, hey, this is Libby, and introduced us. And it comes to find out that the guy that he introduced me to knew my brother, or knew of my brother, had met him and was connected through the church to a lot of my brother's friends, and had known what had happened to Shep and my family. And it was like, I felt in that moment like, oh, okay, like he knows me. This guy, I don't know him, but he knows me, and was very welcoming. And then the pastor saw, I think she was the principal of the school that my brother had played sports with. And he called her over and was like, "This is Libby Akery." And her face immediately and just recognized, me and the situation and my family. And so I'm standing there, and I don't know if it really dawned on me till later how faithful like the Lord was in that moment where I was desperate, and he plopped it in my lap, because, this guy leads a small group that I started going to immediately. And I think the very first night I was there, I just word vomited because I was fresh. I don't even think I was a month out of my grief or a month out of losing Shep. And so word vomited what had happened and was rallied behind and prayed for. And he gave me out of that just a really dear friend that spent years doing life with me and made me less lonely and all of those things. And so I think that was a significant turning point for me spiritually, for just a new season. Because again, when I graduated college at 21 years old, I'm literally thinking, I want to get married. I want to live my life. And I didn't get married for 13 years after I graduated college. And so I feel like entering my 30s and the turning point of getting this job and then this church family really shifted in me a season of contentment, a season of joy. I loved my position at the museum. I was thriving. My siblings started having kids, and I rocked the aunt life. I was able to be there and support. And I believe my siblings will tell you that was a significant impact on them to have, me be so available, and just, I really poured into them. Again, I was pouring into my job. I was pouring into my small group, and I entered my 30s thriving, and really just at peace with the season of life I was in. I'm one of 14 grandkids, and obviously losing, Shep took us down to 13, and I'm one of, now 5 kids, but everyone was married. Even my youngest sister, she's 8 years younger than me. She got married in 2020. I have a cousin who's 9 or 10 years younger than me. He got married before me. So I remember the first year we all go on vacation together. And so there's 50 of us there. And I remember the first year I was like, oh, I am the only one alone here. Everyone is married. Everyone had started having kids. And obviously it stings. I felt like I was like, Lord, this is the deepest desire of my heart. Come on now. But as I said, my 30s, my job, my career, I was the aunt. I was just really, really happy. And I was just really, really thriving. So I think it was 2022. I've been off and on dating apps. I've dated, so I'm thinking, yes, I wanted to get married, and I spent 13 years out of college before I got married, but I did date. I had relationships. I was trying to find the one, and I'd spent a lot of time on dating apps. And if you've ever lived in that world, I'm sorry. But it was a struggle. And so I was really, really close to taking a break. I would be on the dating apps, and then I would take a break, and I'd be on the dating apps, and I would take a break. And I was really, really close to taking a break. And I saw this profile pop up on my screen, and his name was Caleb, and blonde hair, blue-eyed beard, kind of honestly resembled my family, the appearance of my family. And I laughed because my oldest brother's name is Caleb. And so I was like, oh, that's really funny. His name is Caleb. So my middle brother's name is Ethan, and my sister married a guy named Ethan. So we already had 2 Ethans. And so when I saw this guy's profile was Caleb, I even screenshot it and sent it to my sister and was like, he's pretty cute, but should I swipe right just because his name is Caleb? And she was like, oh, he is cute, but yes, definitely do it. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to swipe right because his name is Caleb. But I remember even as I swiped right on this particular profile that it just felt different. And my husband will tell you the same thing when he swiped as well, that he knew when he was swiping on his wife. And I don't know if I was that confident at the time, but I knew when I was swiping that I was at least going to meet this. Something was going to come of this, even though I kind of did it almost to be funny because his name was Caleb. But so we started talking in September. I think we matched September 10th of 2022. He traveled for work, so it was actually about 3 weeks before we met in person. And so I think the first time we met in person was the first week in October 2nd, 3rd. To put it into context, we were married December 29th of that same year. So we dated, fell in love just really, really fast. But it felt 100% right. And I think so much of why, not that I'm saying I remained single, but like I just had a lot of like, I would start getting in a situation or dating someone more like, is this getting serious? And I would start to feel really anxious because I think maybe I just knew it wasn't right but I had zero anxiety. I introduced him really quickly to my family, all of the things. And yeah, it felt right. And it obviously was. We're happily married today. But yeah, I felt like at the moment I was 34 years old and God had answered my prayer. And we were married in December. We had a formal sort of wedding in April of 2023, a couple months later, just to celebrate our marriage with our families. And we went on a honeymoon and then got pregnant in May of 2023. So a lot happening all at once. But one thing that I've learned, I don't know if it's even learned. My story hasn't ended, right? So I grew up in a Christian home. I've walked with Jesus most of my life. I finally had the desires of my heart, met and all of those things. And you'd think at that point I was living a perfect life. But I will say the first 2 years of our marriage were really, really hard for me. And I think part of that is you have a lot of adjustments. We got, married fast. So I essentially, even though I knew my husband well, I married a stranger in some people's eyes. And so it was a lot of adjustment. We got pregnant really fast. So that changes a lot of things in me. We had a water leak in our kitchen a couple months after that. So we spent the first year of our marriage pregnant with a basically gutted kitchen. My husband was adjusting to a lot of things and really... Yeah, so it was a lot to process and adjust. But we are now, I feel like I've seen the Lord be, again, really, really faithful. We now have a second baby girl, so we have 2 little girls. It's been it's been a good season. I left my career. I got to stay home with them. And that's been tough. As I said, I had 6 years at my job and I loved it. But I know the Lord was calling me to what's the word I'm looking for? Stand on what I've wanted my whole life, right? Like I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And then I had a job that I loved. And I feel like I did struggle a little bit. But I feel confident that I am here for a purpose to raise our girls and to be an influence to them, to be a good wife, to continue to follow Jesus. We are very active in our church right now, which has just been amazing. And it's been really good the last, I think, 6 months for me to just see so much of God's faithfulness in my own spiritual walk, in our family, in my marriage, and our extended family. Yeah. So I feel like it took me a long time to get here, right? It took me 34 years to feel like I was ending up where I always thought I wanted to be, and to see God's faithfulness through the hard times, through the good times, the way he's orchestrated things. There was, like I said, there were some hard times where I'm like, I'm embarrassed. Like my life is falling apart and I'm embarrassed. And to now look back on all the no's, to all the times that he redirected, or all the times that I felt defeated, was to put me in this exact moment, in this exact season. And I just feel incredibly privileged and blessed to be a follower of Jesus.